Notebook 1. A Train Bound for Glory. Note: the following entry, undated, appears on the first page of the first notebook of May Dodd's journal. I leave this record for my dear children, Hortense and William, in the event that they never see their loving mother again, and so they might one day know the truth of my unjust incarceration, my escape from hell, and into whatever is to come in these pages. 23rd of March, 1875. Today is my birthday, and I have received the greatest gift of all, freedom. I make these first poor scribblings aboard the westbound Union Pacific train, which departed Union Station, Chicago at 6:35 a.m. this morning, bound for Nebraska. We are told that it will be a 14-day trip with many stops along the way, and with a change of trains in Omaha. Although our final destination was intended to have been concealed from us, I have ascertained from overhearing conversations among our military escort, they underestimate a woman's auditory powers, that we are being first taken to Fort Sidney aboard the train, and from there transported by wagon train to Fort Laramie, Wyoming, in the territory, and then on to Camp Robinson in the Nebraska territory. How strange is life, to think that I would find myself on this train, embarking upon this long journey, watching the city retreating behind me. I sit facing backwards on the train in order to have a last glimpse of Chicago, the layer of dense black coal smoke that daily creeps out over the beach of Lake Michigan, like a giant parasol, the muddy, bustling city passing by me for the last time. How I have missed this loud, raucous city since my dark and silent incarceration. And now I feel like a character in a theater play, torn from the real world, acting out some terrible and as yet unwritten role. How I envy these people I watch from the train window, hurrying off to the safety of their daily travels, while we are borne off, captives of fate, into the great unknown void. Now we pass the new shanties that ring the city, that have sprung up everywhere since the Great Fire of '71. Little more than cobbled together scraps of lumber, they teeter in the wind like houses of cards, to form a heavy kind of rickety fence around the perimeters of Chicago, as if somehow trying to contain their sprawling metropolis. Filthy, half-dressed children play in muddy yards, and stare blankly at us as we pass, as if we, or perhaps they, are creatures of some other world. How I long for my dear own children. What I would give to see them one last time, to hold them. Now I press my hand against the train window to wave to one tiny child, who reminds me somehow of my own sweet son William. But this poor child's hair is fair and greasy, hanging in the dirty ringlets around his mud-streaked face. His eyes are intensely blue, and he raises his tiny hand tentatively as we pass to return my greeting. I should say my farewell. I watch him growing smaller and smaller, and then we leave these last poor outposts behind as the eastern sun illuminates the retreating city. The stage fades smaller and smaller into the distance. I watch as long as I can, and only then do I finally gain the courage to change seats, to give up my dark and troubled past, and to turn around to face an uncertain and terrifying future. And when I do so, the breath catches me in my throat at the immensity of the earth that lies before us, the prairie unspeakable in its vast, lonely reaches. Dizzy and faint at the sight of it, I feel as if the air has been sucked from my lungs, as if I had fallen off the edge of the world, and I'm hurtling headlong through an empty space. And perhaps I have, perhaps I am. But dear God, forgive me. I shall never again utter a complaint. I shall always remind myself how wonderful it is to be free, how I prayed for this moment every day of my life, and my prayers are unanswered. The terror in my heart of what lies ahead seems of little consequence compared with the prospect of spending my lifetime as an inmate in that lonesome prison. For it was a prison far more than a hospital. We were prisoners rather than patients. Our medical treatment consisted of being held captive behind iron bars, like animals in the zoo, ignored by indifferent doctors, tortured, taunted, and insulted by sadistic attendants. My definition of a lunatic asylum, a place where lunatics are created. Why am I here? I asked Dr. Kaiser when he first came to see me, fully a fortnight after my admittance. Why, due to your promiscuous behavior, he answered, as if genuinely surprised that I dared to even pose such a query. But I am in love, I protested, and then I told him about Harry Ames. My family placed him here because I have left home to live out of wedlock with a man whom they considered to be beneath my station. For no better reason than that. When they could not convince me to leave him, they tore me from him and from my babies. Can you not see, doctor, that I am no more insane than you? Then the doctor raised his eyebrows and scribbled on his notepad, nodding with an infuriating air of sanctimony. Ah, he said, I see you believe that you were sent here as part of a conspiracy among your family. And he rose and he left me, and I did not see him again for nearly 6 months. During this initial period, I was subject to excruciating treatments prescribed by the good doctor to cure me of my illness. These consisted of daily injections of scalding water into my vagina, evidently intended to calm my deranged sexual desires. At the same time, I was confined to my bed for weeks on end, forbidden from fraternizing with other patients, not allowed to read, write letters, or pursue any other diversion. The nurses and attendants did not speak to me as if I did not exist. I endured the further humiliation of being forced to use a bedpan, although there was nothing whatsoever physically wrong with me. Were I to protest, or I was found by a nurse out of my bed, I would be strapped into it for the remainder of the day and night. It was during this period of confinement that I truly lost my mind. If the daily torture weren't enough, the complete isolation and activity were in themselves unsupportable. I longed for fresh air and exercise, to promenade along Lake Michigan as I had once had. At great risk, I would steal from my bed before dawn and stand on a chair in my room, straining to see out through the iron bars that covered my tiny shaded window, just to clutch a glimpse of the daylight, one patch of green grass on the lawn outside. I wept bitterly at my fate. I struggled against the tears, willed them away, for I had also learned that I must not allow anyone on staff to see me weep. Lest it be it said, the addition of the doctor's absurd diagnosis of promiscuity, that I was also a victim of hysteria and melancholia, which would only be the cause of further tortures. Let me here set down once and forever the true circumstances of my incarceration. 4 years ago, I fell in love with a man named Harry Ames. Harry was several years my senior and a foreman of my father's grain elevator operations. We had met at my parents' home, where Harry became regularly to consult with father on business matters. Harry was a very attractive man, if somewhat rough around the edges, with strong masculine arms and a certain working man's self-confidence. He was nothing like the insipid, privileged boys with whom of girls my station are reduced to socializing at tea and cotillions. Indeed, I was quite swept away by Harry's charms. One thing led to another, and yes, well, surely by the standards of some, I might be called promiscuous. I am not ashamed to admit that I've always been a woman of passionate emotions and powerful physical desires. I do not deny them. When I came to a full flower at an early age, I'd always quite intimidated the awkward young men of my family's narrow social circle. Harry was different. He was a man. I was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. We began to see each other secretly. Both of us knew that father would never condone our relationship, as Harry was as anxious about being found out as I, for he knew that it would cost him his job. But we could not resist one another. We could not stay apart. For the first time I lay with Harry, I became with child, my daughter Hortense. Truly, I felt her burst being into my womb in the consummation of our love. I must say, Harry behaved like a gentleman and assumed all full responsibility. He offered to marry me, which I flatly refused. For although I loved him and still do, I am an independent, some might say unconventional woman. I was not prepared to marry. I would not, however, give up my child, and so without explanation, I moved out of my parents' home and took up residence with my beloved in a little shabby little house on the banks of the Chicago River, where we lived simply and happily for a time. Naturally, it was not long before father learned about his foreman's deception and promptly dismissed him. But Harry soon found work with one of father's competitors, and I too found employment. I went to work in a factory that processed prairie chickens for the Chicago market. It was filthy, exhausting work, for which my privileged upbringing had in no way prepared me. At the same time, and perhaps for the same reason, it was oddly liberating to be out in the real world and making my own way there. I gave birth to Hortense, and almost immediately became pregnant with my son William, Sweet Willie. I tried to maintain contact with my parents. I wished them to know their grandchildren and not to judge me too harshly for having chosen a different path for myself. But mother was largely hysterical whenever I arranged to visit her. Indeed, it is she, perhaps, who should have been institutionalized, not I. And father was inflexible and refused to even see me when I came to the house. I finally stopped going there altogether and kept only a tenuous contact with my family through my older married sister, also named Hortense. By the time I gave birth to Willie, Harry and I had begun to have some difficulties. I wonder now if father's agents were already working on him. Even then, he seemed to change almost overnight, to become distant and remote. He began to drink and stay out all night, and when he came home, I could smell another woman on him. It broke my heart, for I still loved him. Still, I was more than ever glad that I had not married him. It was one such night, when Harry was away, that father's blackguards came. They burst through the door of our house in the middle of the night, accompanied by a nurse who snatched up my babies and spirited them away as the men restrained me. I fought them for all it was worth, screaming, kicking, biting, scratching, but of course to no avail. I have not seen my children since that dark night. I was taken directly to the lunatic asylum, where I was consigned to lie in bed in my darkened room day after day, week after week, month after month, with nothing to occupy my time but my daily torture and constant thoughts of my babies. I had no doubt they were living with father and mother. I did not know what had become of Harry and what was haunted by thoughts of him. Harry, my Harry, love of my life, father of my children, did father reward you with the pieces of gold to give me up to his ruffians in the middle of the night? Did you sell your own babies to him, or did you simply have you murdered? Perhaps I shall never know the truth. All of my misery for the crime of falling in love with a common man, all of my heartbreak, torture, and punishment because I chose to bring you, my dearest children, into the world, all of my black and hopeless despair because I chose an unconventional life. But surely nothing has come before can be considered unconventional in the light of where I am now going. Let me record the exact events that led me to be on this train. 2 weeks ago, a man and a woman came into the ladies' day room on the asylum. Owing to the nature of my affliction, my moral perversion, as it was described by my commitment papers, a shame and a travesty. How many other women, I wonder, have been locked away like this for no just cause. I was among those patients strictly segregated by gender, prohibited from even fraternizing with members of the opposite sex, presumably for fear that I might try to copulate with them. Good God. On the other hand, my diagnosis seems to be considered an open invitation to certain male members of the asylum staff to visit my room in the middle of the night. How many times did I wake up as if suffocating with the weight of one particularly loathsome attendant named Franz, pressed up against me, a fat, stinking German, corpulent and sweating. God help me, I prayed to kill him. The man and woman looked us over appraisingly, as if we were cattle at auction, and they chose 6 or 7 among us to come with them to a private staff room. Conspicuously absent from this group were any of the older women, or any of the hopelessly, irredeemably insane, who sit rocking and moaning for hours on end, or who weep incessantly, or hold querulous conversations with their demons. No, these poor afflicted were passed over, and more presentable of us lunatics chose for an audience of our visitors. After we had retired to the private staff room, the gentleman, a Mr. Benton, explained that he was interviewing potential recruits for a government program that involved the Indians of the Western Plains. The woman who we introduced as Nurse Crowley would, with our consent, perform a physical examination upon us. Should we be judged based on the interview and examination to be suitable candidates for the program, we might be eligible for immediate release from the hospital. Yes, naturally I was intrigued by the proposal, yet there was a further condition of family consent, which I had scant hope of ever obtaining. Since I volunteered my full cooperation, truly, even an interview and a physical examination seemed preferable to the endless hours of agonizing monotony spent sitting or lying in the bed, with nothing to pass the time besides the foreboding thoughts about the injustice of my sentence, and the devastating loss of my babies, the utter hopelessness of my situation, and the awful anticipation of my next treatment. Did I have any reason to believe that I was not fruitful? This was the first question posed to me by Nurse Crowley at the beginning of her examination. I must say I was taken aback, but I answered promptly, already having set my mind to pass this test, whatever its purpose. En contraire, I said, and I told the nurse of the 2 precious children already born out of wedlock, the son and daughter, who were so cruelly torn from their mother's bosom. Indeed, I said, I am so fruitful that if my beloved Harry Ames, Esquire, simply gazed upon me, a certain romantic longing in his eyes, babes sprang out of my loins like seeds spilling from grain sack. I must mention the unmentionable, the sole reason that I did not come with child by the repulsive attendant Franz, the monster who visited me by night, is that the pathetic cretin sprayed his revolting discharge on my bed covers, humping and moaning and weeping bitterly in his premature agonies. I fear that I might have gone too far in my enthusiasm to impress Nurse Crowley with my fertility. She looked at me with that tedious and by now all familiar expression of guardedness with which people regarded the insane and the alleged insane alike, as if our maladies might be contagious. But apparently I passed my initial examination, where I was interviewed by Mr. Benton himself, who asked me a series of distinctly queer questions. Did I know how to cook over campfire? Did I enjoy spending time outdoors? Did I enjoy sleeping out overnight? What was my personal estimation of the Western savage? The Western savage, I interrupted. Having never met any Western savages, sir, it would be different for me to have formed any estimation of them one way or another. Finally, Mr. Benton got down to business at hand. Would you be willing to make a great personal sacrifice in the service of your government, he asked. But of course, I answered without hesitation. Would you consider an arranged marriage to a Western savage for the express purpose of bearing a child with him? Ha! I barked at a laugh of utter astonishment. But why on earth? I asked, more curious than offended. For what purpose? To ensure a lasting peace on the Great Plains, Mr. Benton answered, to provide a safe passage to our courageous settlers from the constant depredations of the bloodthirsty barbarians. I see. But of course I did not put all together. As part of our agreement, added Mr. Benton, your president will demonstrate his eternal gratitude to you by arranging for your immediate release from this institution. Truly? I would be released from this place? I asked, trying to conceal the trembling in my voice. That is absolutely guaranteed, he said, assuming that your legal guardian, if such exists, is willing to sign the necessary consent forms. Already, I was formulating my plan for this major hurdle on my freedom, and again I answered without a moment's hesitation. I stood and curtsied deeply, weak in the knees, both from my mouths of vital confinement and pure excitement of the prospect of freedom. I should be deeply honored, sir, to perform this noble duty for my country, I said, to offer my humble services to the President of the United States. The truth is that I would have gladly signed on for a trip to hell to escape the lunatic asylum, and yet perhaps this is exactly what I would have done. As to the critical matter of obtaining my parents' consent, let me say in preface that although I may have accused of insanity and promiscuity, no one has ever taken me for an idiot. It is the responsibility of the hospital's chief physician, my own preposterous diagnostician, Dr. Sidney Kaiser, to notify the families of those patients under consideration for the BFI program. These initials stand for Brides for Indians, as Mr. Benton explained to us, and invite them to the hospital to be informed of the program and to obtain their signatures and the necessary release papers, at which the time the patients would be free to participate in the program if they so choose. In the year and a half that I have been incarcerated, there against my will, I had, as I may have mentioned, been visited only twice by the good doctor. However, through my repeated but futile efforts to obtain an audience with him, I had become quite acquainted with Assistant Martha Atwood, a fine woman who took pity upon me and who befriended me. Indeed, Martha became my sole friend and confidant in that wretched place. Without her sympathy and visits, I know many small kindnesses she bestowed upon me. I do not know how I could have survived. As we came to know one another, Martha was more than ever convinced that I did not belong in the asylum, and I was no more insane than she, and that, like other women there, had been completely unjustly by my family. When this opportunity presented itself for me to escape, she agreed to help me in my desperate plan. First, she borrowed correspondence from father out of my file in Dr. Kaiser's office, and she made a duplicate of his personal letterhead. Together, we forged a letter in father's hand, written to Dr. Kaiser, in which father explained that he was traveling on business and had been able to attend a proposed meeting in the institution. Dr. Kaiser would have no reason to question this, and he was aware of father's position as the president of Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, for which father had designed and built the entire grain elevator system, the largest and most advanced such warehouse in the city. As he forever reminding us of father's job involved nearly constant travel, and as a child I rarely saw him. In our forged letter to Dr. Kaiser, Martha and I, or should I say father, wrote that the family had recently been contacted directly by the government regarding my participation in the BFI program, and that Agent Benton had personally guaranteed him my safety for the duration of my stay in the Indian Territory. Because Martha had been privy to the entire interview process, I knew that I had passed all the necessary requirements and had been judged to be a prime candidate for the program. Not that this represents any great accomplishment on my part, considering the main criterion for acceptance was that one be of childbearing age and condition, and not so insane as to be incapacitated. It is, I believe, safe to say that the government was less interested in the success of these matrimonial unions than they were in their meeting their quota, something that father, the ever businessman and pragmatist, could appreciate. Thus, in our letter, father gave his full blessing for me to participate in, as I believe we wrote, this exciting and high-minded plan to assimilate the heathens. I know that father had always viewed the Western savages primarily as an impediment to the growth of American agriculture. He detests the notion that all of the fertile plain is going to waste, when it could be put to good biblical use, filling his grain elevators. The truth is, father harbors a deep-seated hatred of the red man, simply for being a poor businessman, a shortcoming which father believes to be the most serious character flaw of all. At his and mother's endless dinner parties, he is fond of giving credit to his and his wealthy guests' great good fortunes by toasting the Sac Chief Blackhawk, who once noticed that land cannot be sold, nothing can be sold, but for those things can be carried away, a notion that father found enormously quaint and amusing. Too, and I must acknowledge this fact, I believe that secretly father might have actually appreciated this opportunity to be rid of me. of the shame in my behavior my condition has brought on our family. For if the truth to be known, father is a terrible snob. In a circle of friends and business cronies, the stigma of having a lunatic or even worse, a sexually promiscuous daughter must have been nearly unbearable for him. So when he went on with his letter, in his typically overblown but distracted manner, in the same tone he might employ if he were giving me permission for me to send off to finishing school for young ladies. Perhaps it is simply due to the fact that the same blood flows through our veins, but it was almost diabolically simple for me to innate father's writing style. To state his conviction that the bracing Western air, the hardy native life, and the glorious of outdoors, the fascinating culture exchange might be just the way my poor, wayward daughter requires to set her addled mind right again. It is an astonishing thing, is it not, the notion of a father being asked and giving permission for his daughter to copulate with savages? Enclosed with father's letter were the signed hospital release papers, of all which Martha had delivered by private messenger to Dr. Kaiser's office. A tidy and ultimately perfectly convincing little package. Of course, when her part in the deception was discovered, as it surely would be, Martha knew that she faced immediate dismissal, possibly by even criminal prosecution. And thus it is that my true, intrepid friendship, childless and loveless, and if the truth be told rather plain to look upon, basing in all probability of a life of spinsterhood and loneliness, enlisted in the BFI program herself. She rides beside me on this very train, and so at least I do not embark alone on this great adventure of my life.